Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Now, as tension remains high across Europe and the war in Ukraine persists, European defense ministers are meeting to strategize how best to support Ukraine against Russia's aggression. Discussions include military aid, and Zelensky's recently presented a victory plan which seeks to stronger defense guarantees and more weapons to turn the tide in Ukraine's favor. The German and Dutch defense ministers are pivotal in these talks alongside the broader NATO coalition. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss these critical meetings and security in Europe is Eoin Micheál McNamara, a research fellow at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Hello.
So we're taking a look at Zelensky's victory plan, which we've been discussing for the past few weeks now. This is going to be hinging on a lot of security guarantees. How realistic is it for Ukraine to secure these from these Western allies?
Well, I think they're a long way off yet, but they need to be strived for. Ukraine does need meaningful, steadfast security guarantees. There should be no going back to the meaningless days of the Budapest Memorandum when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994 and was given political guarantees that turned out to be not worth the paper they were written on, turned out to be meaningless from the UK, from France, from the US, and indeed from Russia, that Ukraine's territorial integrity will be respected. It wasn't. We saw this in 2014. We saw this in 2022. And to ensure that we don't get a ceasefire eventually and that Russia isn't tempted to rebuild its armed forces and go again for another war in Ukraine, that needs to be blocked off watertight. And the only way to do that, that I can see at least, is really strong deterrence. That's only going to likely come from strong security guarantees for Ukraine from the Western powers in one form or another.
Right, and speaking of deterrence, there seems to be some new development on this front, especially when it comes to the long-range weapons used inside Russia. Recently, very recently actually, probably just a couple of hours ago, the CDU leader has said that they might consider allowing Ukraine to use these Western-supplied long-range weapons, or even providing them with new Taurus missiles if Russia continues to bombard Ukrainian infrastructure. Do you think this is a sign that some countries like Germany are changing its tune and being a little less reluctant when it comes to supplying Ukraine with these weapons and letting them use it? Is it perhaps a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel here?
Well, unfortunately, the Western powers, I mean, well, there have been, with other weapon systems, there have been successes for Ukraine with weapon systems that Ukraine has received from Western donors. You can think of the Javelin anti-tank missiles early on. You can think of HIMARS, multi-launch rocket systems towards the middle of this war, as we look at it within the period that has occurred from 2022. There have been successes, but the West has really not had a long-term strategy for supporting Ukraine with military aid. And this is really beginning to tell now, as a lot of other commentators will tell you. The West has a kind of an escalation management strategy where it peaks a little bit at how Russia might react, then gives a piecemeal amount of weaponry. And if that's okay, if there's been no serious reaction from Russia, then it reconsiders its piecemeal strategy again. And this has enabled military aid getting to Ukraine too slow and has stagnated in parts the Ukrainian war effort, which has been very, very frustrating for the Ukrainian troops and the Ukrainian military on the ground. So, yes, that hesitancy is there at the moment with long-range strike capability weapons that can strike into Russian territory. It is, of course, more efficient to go after the archer rather than to shoot the plentiful arrows out of the sky, and is, of course, more economically efficient, more cost efficient to do things that way, as well as being more militarily efficient. However, Western powers are still dithering a bit because they fear going up the chain of escalation. They fear that Vladimir Putin might threaten or might make moves towards using a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, which would have a normative stigma about it. We can debate the battlefield utility of it, but would be very serious in terms of the norms of international relations and the state of safety in the world. So that's how Western powers view things. I would predict that we have a few weeks or months yet of debate on this question of long-range strike weapons.
Right, like you mentioned, the Western powers seems to be having a little bit of commitment issues when it comes to helping Ukraine win the war. It seems like they do want to support Ukraine, but at the same time, not to the extent where it is pivotal enough to see significant change. Now, Zelenskyy is on his way to Brussels. Depending on when you're watching this, he's probably either arrived or still on his way, and he's given a message that is somewhat optimistic. He made some statements about working together with Biden and gives a pretty kind of optimistic view about his peace plan being carried forward. Do you think that we might actually see some changes when it comes to attitude if this peace plan is indeed comprehensive enough and well-rounded enough to convince perhaps some of these Western leaders that it is worth pursuing?
Well, I don't think, there's 3 addendums to the peace plan that will remain secret, but will be shared with Ukraine's partners. So people on the outside world, like myself, do not know what they are. But in my view, there was nothing really that surprising in what Zelenskyy revealed before the Ukrainian parliament in this plan. We know Ukraine will have to keep its unity, and that will have to be supported, most importantly, by the Ukrainian government and by the Ukrainian people. They will need to come together. And many commentators have been saying for many years now, or for a couple of years, for the last couple of years, that Ukraine will need steadfast security guarantees. And we'll need strong military, and we'll need advanced weaponry, and we'll need different layers of deterrence. I know that the Zelenskyy plan puts an emphasis on non-nuclear deterrence, but it will need different layers of deterrence, different layers of conventional deterrence. This, if you're interested in the region, if you're interested in NATO's wider eastern flank, this will come as no surprise. Joining NATO, or the path to NATO membership for countries like Poland, for countries like the Baltic states during the 1990s and into the 2000s was vital for their security. It anchored them on the Western course. It took away that uncertainty of East-West division. And once these states did get that security, did get NATO membership, did get their security guarantees, it became an incredible platform for economic and social development. I've spent a lot of time in the region, in the Baltic states, and overlooking the Baltic states nearby from Finland. And once they got that security, and once they had that incentive, the rate, and you can count countries like Poland in as well, the rate of social and economic progression has been breathtaking to outsiders like me. And security has been the main platform for that has enabled that. And I think these lessons from neighboring countries that Ukraine is very, very close to, has been very, very well heeded in Ukraine. And I think this is a very good formula, a very good vision through which to see Ukraine's eventual post-war reconstruction.
Right, like you mentioned, the economic and the social kind of factor is very hard to maintain without a security guarantee in the form of NATO. And of course, this is going to be very pivotal for Ukraine, not just its survival, but for its thriving going forward. So thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.